Talk Shoes. Recorded live.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Castle of Horror podcast, the show dedicated to horror, movies, and awesomeness. This week we kick off a new retrospective on the Evil Dead series, and we're looking at Evil Dead 1981, or I guess 83 if you believe when it came out and how long it took them to do stuff. So it's kind of different. Jason is actually out, and so regular fans, this is me, Tony Salvaggio. I will be hosting this run of Evil Dead movies. And bear in mind, if you haven't seen today's movie, we're going to be talking about it from the perspective of horror fans who have, so there's spoilers ahead. As I said, I'm your host, Tony Salvaggio, lead singer of the band Deserts of Mars, and co-author of the manga-style book, Psycom, and the steampunk adventure Clockworks. Also, we have in Austin, Drew Edwards, writer of the long-running Halloween Man comic from Monsterverse. Say hey.
Hey.
And our new special guest, we have Max Meehan. He's a screenwriter, filmmaker, and owner of the independent pro wrestling company Inspire Pro. Say hey, Max.
Hey, how you doing?
Awesome. And Max is a legit horror fan like we are, so it's really good. I've been trying to get him on the podcast for a while. So, also, and from Los Angeles, special guest Adam Foshko, story and creative consultant for the acclaimed Call of Duty series, as well as screenwriter and creative producer for the wildly successful Skylander series. What up,
Kadu Barada Nikto.
Oh, nice. That's good. And like I said, we'll be doing tonight is dedicated to Evil Dead. According to Wikipedia, 1981 American horror film written and directed by Sam Raimi and executive produced by Raimi and Bruce Campbell, who also stars alongside Ellen Sandwich and Betsy Baker. The Evil Dead focuses on 5 college students vacationing on an isolated cabin in a remote wooded area. After they find an audio tape that releases a legion of demons and spirits, members of the group suffer from demonic possession, leading to increasingly gory mayhem, which I think is that's an apt description. So, so we're it's gonna be a little bit different. We're gonna kind of freeform it. And I guess what we'll do, as per usual, is go through first impressions. Starting, I guess let's do it, Drew, Max, and then Adam.
All right. This is. I've not seen this one in a while. I'm much more of a devotee to Evil Dead 2, which is my favorite of the original trilogy. But I have to say, like coming back and revisiting this, because I don't think I've seen this since I was in my 20s, and it's still a really, really effective movie, considering that these were more or less amateur filmmakers when they put this out. I mean, it's really still really visceral and actually really scary at parts. I was watching it with I watched it several times in preparing for the podcast, and my wife is in the room with me, and she actually at one point had to leave the room, and she's used to being around horror films and watching horror films and enjoys quite a few horror films, but she found parts of this to be too much, and I actually think that's a pretty high compliment for a movie that is now over 30 years old. So, I enjoyed watching this, and I can't really summarize it any better than that. It was just fun to revisit this and get some goosebumps over it.
Awesome. Max? First impression?
I hadn't seen this in quite some time either, but I still have a very vivid recollection of it. I had been talking with people about this before I actually sat down to watch it, because I told people I was going to be doing this podcast, and one of the things that kind of stuck out to me was that people continually say this movie is grittier and dirtier feeling than the subsequent films in the series, and I don't know if I necessarily agree. I think this film feels definitely cheaper than the others, and in some weird way, I think that adds an element of realism that makes the other films feel very different or even cartoony. I know this movie was blown up to 35 millimeter, and I kept thinking back to Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is another one of those films that has that just a gritty feel to it. But it's, part 2 is still just as dirty, I think. But yeah, I was really paying attention to, the way that it looked. That definitely stuck out to me this time after years of not seeing it.
Cool. Adam?
Well, when I first saw this picture, this is really a picture. It's grown into being a picture from being just a straight movie. It's the kind of thing that I caught it in the video store. I was working at a video store and starting, systematically in all the different sections in A. And so I was in the horror section and started in A and got to E for Evil Dead and popped this thing in, and I was kind of amazed. It really blew my mind because, Max is right. There is a grittiness to it, and that people do keep talking about. But when I saw it, its edginess, its grittiness, did give it a great sense of realism, but also gave it this enormous sense of atmosphere. And obviously some of it was, camera effects, and Sam Raimi cam was really amazing. But, it really made an incredible impression upon me, not just that it was, something that was scary and kind of over the top for the time, but it was incredibly inventive, partly because of its budget, but also, this is Sam Raimi when he was really struggling and coming up with new stuff, and you can really see the spark of something that he then built on later when he really became Sam Raimi. And I think when we saw other pictures, Evil Dead 2 and certainly Army of Darkness, those really became, like, Army of Darkness was much more of a Sam Raimi movie than, a true, like a real gritty horror picture like Evil Dead is. But Evil Dead just has this amazing effect that even today, when we're looking at it again, it with fresh eyes, it's still remarkably good. It manages to sidestep a lot of the cheap, the low budget problems that similar movies might have fallen into. It's still amazing. It's still a gem. I think Stephen King called it one of the fifth best horror film ever, and I tend to agree. It's really amazing.
Cool. For me, I saw the trailer for Evil Dead 2 when I went to see, I think it was Dream Warriors. And I think the trailer for Evil Dead 2 freaked me out more than anything in Dream Warriors, like, for the whole movie. But it really did set the pace. And then, I was talking to a friend of mine later who had seen Evil Dead 1, and then he saw 2, and he was like, well, it's the same movie. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, yeah, it's just kind of the same movie. So then I saw Evil Dead 2, and then I saw Evil Dead 1 much, much later. I guess because I was like, well, why would I want to see the same movie? And then when I finally saw it, I really got it. The grittiness, like we were talking about, I think, that whole, it's one of those things where you have something to prove, I think, when you're, a first-time director for, like, a feature film, or a lot of people do. I know some people who, maybe don't. But you can tell in the passion. And, I was really surprised. I think there's a few things just because of they're trying new things and they're trying to do this this horror thing right, and their influences, being Night of the Living Dead and stuff like that. That I think that's what really gives it that gritty thing we're talking about. I really, really like the movie, and I hadn't seen it in quite a while either. And like Drew, 2 is still, I think, the distilled, like, kind of glitzier version of this, but there's so much charm and just coolness and newness to this that now we can't really do that because we have to find something else that's new, because there's so many people, it's so good and so popular that people have just cribbed it like to death.
Well, can I say that even though I do like 2 better, I think this is a very, very, it's no doubt an important film because we're talking about it and we're doing a whole retrospective based around Evil Dead. But this movie, I talk a lot about, like, the gonzo-ness of 80s horror a lot throughout the various episodes of this podcast. And I really do feel like this movie, even though they started filming it in the late 70s and filmed it into the early 80s, this is like a tone-setting movie because it does have this insanity about it. And it's almost like it infected other horror films that were later to come. Like I still, you look at Reanimator and, From Beyond, some of the later Friday the 13th sequels, and, the insanity that is like kind of chipped off of this went into all these other movies that were throughout the decade, including Evil Dead 2, but certainly not limited to this series. Because, I mean, there was just a lot of insane horror films in the 80s, and this is kind of the genesis of that in a lot of ways.
Right.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that this what makes this film particularly unique compared against the other films in the series is that you can really obviously tell that this is a complete passion project, because when you read through it, the notes on the making of the film, these guys went into incredible debt. The cast were generally freezing their asses off to the point of being hypothermic at points. So that these were people who weren't doing this for a paycheck. I think that when you compare it to 2, and this is the thing that I noticed, there's just such a different spirit about it. 2 is good and more refined, and I think it does a really good job of capturing the aesthetic that everybody has come to know as Evil Dead. I think it's less formed in the first film, honestly, but there's still something. There's a magic that you just really can't. I don't know. You can't necessarily quantify it, but it's palpable, and it's really incredible to watch, or at least for me, because last time I saw this, I was probably a teenager, and I probably saw it like repeatedly then. So I was less inclined to revisit it, later on, because I'm always looking for new stuff. But seeing it now, there are things that I appreciate with my adult eye that I didn't when I was younger.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that it's kind of funny that, when we talk about, this is a Raimi film, whereas, later on, like, oh, you can tell but it's kind of funny because also if you look at some of the documentary stuff about Sam Raimi and Campbell and everybody like getting their start and what they were filming when they were making home movies and such, you can really see that in this. Like, this is the biggest budget at the time of everything they'd wanted to do, with the every camera angle at the beginning's kind of cockeyed, and like all the way that they're cutting and everything like that. Like, this is the genesis of all of that we come to think of. And I still hold that I think that there's something to having a low budget but also having passion. And, there's something that separates people who are like true kind of people who get film, because it makes you, I think, more creative. Like, you have to be more creative to use that budget to create something really good. And, sometimes you get something like this, and other times you'll see somebody who may not have the spark or just doesn't care, and you'll get something really super schlocky, and it's not very fun, or it's not executed very well. Whereas this, they've taken like something, just a minuscule budget, especially compared to what we have today, and done some, really great practical effects, really good. They can have good editing. There's cool musical things. There's a lot of great sound design. And
they made those
what you're
sounds
talking about
themselves. That's like the thing.
Yeah.
It's still got that homemade feel to it. One of the consistent arguments I have, because Sam Raimi is one of my favorite directors, and I'm constantly, I feel like ever since Spider-Man 3, I'm constantly defending the guy, and everybody's always like, oh, he's just a schlock filmmaker who lucked out. And I was like, look, if you compare this movie to other movie, this is essentially a grindhouse movie. This was a video nasty. And you compare this to other movies of that type. Like, Sam Raimi's a frickin' artist, man. I mean, like, the camera angles and everything. And you mean to tell me that this guy's just a schlock filmmaker? If he was just a schlock filmmaker, we wouldn't be talking about Evil Dead now. It would be lost, like all the like I loved watching a lot of direct-to-video horror films when I was a kid, but I'm not going to hold up, Dr. Mordred to the level of this,
No,
Thriller Killer or something.
Yeah, like this is a schlocky movie.
A lot of those aren't the same, They don't hold the magic that Evil Dead does. That's for sure.
I look at something like Spider-Man 3, and Raimi was a guy that was in the trenches. Those guys actually, Campbell mortgaged his parents' property to get this finished. It took them a year to edit. These guys were in the trenches. When I look at something like Spider-Man 3, I kind of look at it as being almost like this. It's like an old person's home. It's like it's retirement for Raimi. Just like let him have his his Twilight. The dude knocked his brains out for how many years? He can get a meal ticket past him every once in a while. People need to be more forgiving,
I mean, the truth of it is, Spider-Man, particularly Spider-Man 3, that was such a studio project, and it, there's so many other hands that were involved in that. And I told you guys the story where he was saying, Raimi was, we were working on a version hand in hand with the studio, and he had said, we know what the lowest point in my career was, and he was like, playing the butcher in Innocent Blood. I don't know. Do you have a low point? I don't know. You're awesome. And it's like when we gave Spider-Man, the medal, the key to the city, in the movie. And that was not something that he necessarily wanted to do, but had to do. So I really don't lay any of that kind of stuff at his feet. He is an excellent director who's dealing with the realities of a big studio franchise, where he has to deal with a lot of different voices. When you suddenly get a couple $100 million to work on a thing, there are a lot of other forces that are acting on your product.
$350 million.
Yeah, it's a huge deal.
That's insane. Yeah.
So the more the bigger the budget, the more people are going to have a say in what's going on. And ultimately, I think that's what contributed to him walking away from the picture they had after that, and it was just a matter of I'm done. You're seeing Raimi, I think, the formative spark of Raimi's work, of his passion, as you said, of his skill, of stuff that was just taking shape, that he was actually hammer to anvil making this thing with blood and sweat and creativity and overcoming obstacles. Evil Dead 2, I think, was a much more mature expression of the idea, where he had more confidence, where he had more money, he had, and he could really get the totality of what he had in mind out. And then, Army of Darkness is a free-for-all, and pushing everything up to 11, kind of Raimi style, he really kind of comes into his own. He really is an excellent director, and there's no amount of studio shenanigans that I think will mask that will take away from that. It's still in there. It's just some of the extra stuff that you have to deal with. That's problematic. The question is, was he going to stay, independent? Was he going to say, look, I just want to make my own things and be left alone. This is what I want to do, and I have my own voice. Or did he feel like he could bring something new to Spider-Man and then sort of keep doing it? And, I think if we see anything, I think it's just, the soup, which is, hey, we have an amazing soup film we've thrown into the soup. We have all kinds of other stuff, other flavors that are not really necessarily the best stuff. And, this is kind of what we have at the end. But I put it to you that if we didn't have Raimi sort of in the center of that of Spider-Man 3, it would have been significantly worse. This is just my opinion.
Right. Well,
I agree.
Sort of back to Evil Dead, it is kind of fun to, not just Raimi, but this is also the start of Bruce Campbell, and he hasn't been nearly as mainstream as Sam Raimi has, but he's had a long career now, and it's interesting to see here him. He's basically a kid here. They were saying that when they first started doing meetings for this movie, they were all like 19, 20, and when they started filming, they were like 21, 22. And it's right. Amazing to think about. It's also interesting to see the genesis of the Ash character, because like we look when most people think about Ash, let's be real though, they think about Ash from Army of Darkness, who is, kind of a walking quip machine with, a lot of one-liners and kind of a misogynistic action hero, swagger kind of thing. And that's not really present here. The Ash that we see here, he's actually more of like a sensitive guy. And, he does have a cowardly... Yeah, he is a wimp. Yeah. He is a wimp.
He's very unlikely, actually. That's something I wanted to talk about. Like, when you're watching the movie, in some ways, up until a point, you kind of think Scott is going to be the guy. He's going to be the guy that pulls all this out. But and he's sort of watery in this. He's sort of like, Scott's like taking care of business, and Ash is kind of trembling in the corner, going, what do I do? But
he's always trapped him or something.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, that's good.
The Ash character that's here too, like, the swaggering ladies man that we have in Army of Darkness. This is a guy that's in this movie. He's very attentive to his girlfriend. He's worried about everybody else. He's kind of, before we get to the cowering point, he's kind of almost maternal towards all the other characters, and that's very interesting. And I remember, in the commentary for this, Bruce Campbell talks about how at this time actually having a male protagonist to a horror film was considered to be almost a detriment, because there was this whole concept of you have to have the final girl. They didn't call it that then, but you wanted the young girl to sort of triumph over the monster at the end of the movie. And he is kind of, stereotypically feminine in some ways, which is interesting, because he is effectively a male final girl. I don't know how much they were thinking about this, but it is interesting that he has a unisex name.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in fact, when I was watching the documentary on Nightmare on Elm Street, they talk about the second one where they're like, oh man, well, it's really bad because you have this guy who's supposed to be the protagonist, and here he is screaming all the time. And what a big deal that was, And so this is kind of the same thing where you have Ash kind of, reacting all the time, and, in the way that he does. And it is really interesting to see kind of the genesis, because to me, less than Army of Darkness, the first time, like, the Ash I know of and think of is the first time he puts on the chainsaw in 2,
Oh, yeah, groovy.
And that's where it really, that's just like, bam, that's it,
That's where he turns into Captain Kirk.
Yeah, Exactly. But in it's a lot different. Like the prototype and the way he reacts, and like you said, and just even, but there's still that awesome kind of genesis of all of those guys who had worked together and made all these like little films and home movies and everything together, where they're mugging for the camera, and the way it all plays out, that this really sets that all in motion as we get to where it's a lot more like kind of glossy. Yeah.
I like the way Ash reacts to things, though. Everybody keeps saying how this movie has this sort of realness to it, and I do think he reacts the way a lot of us would if we were kind of stuck out in the, like, okay, you're out in the woods and all your friends are possessed by demons and they're turning into undead monsters, and you have to hack them to pieces and you have to chop off your girlfriend's head. I actually do think you would react much the way Ash does here.
Oh, totally, completely. Yeah, with no sense of bravado or no quipping or enjoyment. It's like it's this whole, he is, girly. I mean, you said it. He reacts in a very girly way, which I put it to you. Most of us would react that way if we were hacking up our friends. what's so interesting is I think between this and his possession and whatever happens later in the series, he definitely changes because of this these rites of passage, I guess, of possession and repossession and having to do all this stuff. He just changes from being super in touch with his feminine side, which also means very natural, very much like us, to something much more like male, male to the 10th power, like super male bravado with the quips, with ready to hack off a witch's head with a chainsaw, no problem.
Well,
yeah,
that's
I think
also
the Kirk comparison.
You first.
He comes off like Captain Kirk to me, like in Army of Darkness. But yeah, it is. We talked about this earlier in the week too, where we talked about how the character just seems to be kind of a punching bag throughout the series, and it is very much about his descent into madness, and now that you mention it, even machismo. So it's kind of funny to correlate the two elements.
Well, I think his personality changes because he has lost his mind, and he has effectively he snaps because he's had enough. I mean, I think realistically, if you look at a lot of these horror movie heroes, and the only one that I can think that really goes throughout a franchise like this is maybe Ripley from the Alien series, but and she undergoes a pretty rip-roaring metamorphosis herself, but you would start to kind of lose it if you kept repeatedly surviving the scenarios that are described in these movies, because these are insane scenarios. I mean, actually, I think Army of Darkness is more or less portrayed as kind of a Ray Harryhausen film gone deeply, deeply wrong. But I think, and honestly, reality being plunged into the Middle Ages would probably be even more disturbing than they portray it. So you probably even go more batshit.
Oh yeah,
sure. It's more of an adventure film too. And this one, man, and because I would say in some ways, after having watched it again for since who knows how long, some of the makeup effects and the way that they make the monsters in this movie and how human the way they switch back and forth because of the budget. In some ways, I think the creatures in this are scarier than Evil Dead, and I wasn't expecting that. In fact, I remember
I agree with that actually.
I remember specifically getting kind of freaked out about Evil Dead and then showing it to my girlfriend at the time, and she was like, "What's scary about that?" Because we were all watching it together. It was a bunch of people. Whereas the first time I saw Evil Dead 2 was by myself. And so at my grandfather's house where there's a train going by and there's crazy squeaky noises and all this stuff. And then when I watched it with her, she's like, "That was a comedy." You can't really say that as much about this film. And I think the way that tree scene in here is really brutal. More brutal than I remembered it. And maybe I'm just getting older, but I was actually like, wow, this no wonder it got an X rating at the time.
You might have even seen an edited copy, though. There's various copies of this that are around. I was reading about how a lot of the effects have been changed. There's a lightning effect that's available only on certain copies that Raimi had removed from the Anchor Bay release. But I know that I've seen versions of it with that tree scene completely cut down. So seeing it now,
no, this one was, the Necronomicon
the whole tree rape thing. That's the one thing that I even as a hardened horror film fan since I was a little kid, that's just a rough scene. And although it does leave me with a question when what's his face, the other fella comes back and talks about the woods attacking him as well.
Yeah.
I kind of wonder if he got tree raped as well, and maybe that says something about me that I'm thinking about that. But I have to wonder, did is that just their way of there is no way you will try to escape if we rape you with the woods when you try to escape. But
that scene really does have a tremendous impact on the film's tone too. It's kind of when when you're hanging out with somebody and everything's chummy, and then all of a sudden out of nowhere they just slap you. It just changes everything from that point on.
Yeah, I think what happens, it takes on a very violent. The rest is very cartoony, but when you sort of get that image, you go, wait, what? Did that happen? What I think just happened? Is that what's happening? It's like, yeah, it's like, oh man, this is serious. It does totally change. It gets an edge right then, where it's over the top, but also has this big edge to it.
Well, I maintain that is the direct line to Dr. Hill, the sleazy severed head in Reanimator. I mean, that's the insanity of 80s. The insanity of 80s horror right there.
No, but that's lascivious. That's different. Believe it, having a head being manipulated with its tongue out and performing oral sex on a woman is, believe it or not, different than this. It's
different, but it's still gross, and it's
wildly gross.
But it's also, like I said, I feel like there's this kind of cultural insanity to movies from this particular time period, and I don't think, like, for Raimi to include something like that, it's like, okay, everybody, show me what you got. You know, how are you going to top this? I just brought Evil Dead on you.
There is this correlation between like horror and death and sex. You know, you've seen it in every other kind of, you know, movie and subgenre we can think of, and even, you know, shittier, kind of even more gross horror films like that you would just never see. It's not even in class, like Bloodsucking Freaks or whatever else. I mean, these horrible, horrible movies. But this interestingly, I think brushes right up against it, because very quickly it veers away from it and goes right back to the gore. It's only just a couple of seconds that this happens, and then we kind of move on very, very quickly. So it's almost like, I think it's almost like a nod to it. It's like, how over the top can we go? And it pulls kind of right away like a weird roller coaster.
I have an interesting observation too. Like, this comes from a period too of film where, you know, rape revenge was very big, and even like in action films and films, many films spanning many genres, it seemed like, to me, of the time, like going back even to the mid-'70s, the epitome of evil that somebody could do in a film to make them a bad guy was do something to a woman against her will. So in a weird way, I also felt like I remember when I saw that scene as a kid, it kind of brought back the same feeling I had toward the villains in the original Billy Jack when they raped Jean. You know,
sure, I remember that movie, sure.
Yeah, it's very dark. It's like it's a line that you cross. It's a taboo that seemed to come up really, really frequently, particularly in grindhouse films. Oh, that guy must be really bad because he raped that chick.
Well,
you know?
but very often the critical difference with that is, I mean, like in Billy Jack, when that happened, those were all people who then deserved to die, and it was all about the revenge. That's right. In this case, this is a revenge that doesn't happen in this movie.
Yeah,
nobody's
evil, you know.
Well, that's the thing that's weird about, like, that's the logic of the Evil Dead universe. It's like you're going to have terrible things visited upon you, and then you're going to yourself become a terrible thing, which in its way is more horrific, because you're right. You don't get that justice. You don't get that vengeance. You just become you become an instrument of this evil. And that's exactly what happens to this girl here. And, you know, I know, you know, from again, I just watched a ton of special features on this today. I know that some of them were saying that they kind of wondered if, after dealing with the way this film was treated in England, if Sam Raimi had second thoughts about this scene. And, I don't know. I mean, obviously, who knows what's going through somebody's head when they're saying, well, this woman gets raped by a vine. But
in the commentary they kind of talk about it, and he's like, I just thought that was something that, that would be, terrible. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but they're kind of giving him like, well, what made you want to do that, And then he doesn't really have a good defense, at the time. He's like, yeah, and you kind of get in his voice kind of like, yeah, I don't know. As you grow older and you kind of, and reality creeps in, and you realize like, wow, maybe that wasn't the best thing. But at the time, he's just like, well, I want this really shocking thing. And, again, that was going on in the movies. You saw a lot of that, especially, like you said, in Grindhouse stuff. I don't get the impression he's exceptionally proud of that scene or anything like that, even remotely, But, you're young and you're out to make this scary thing, and it's going to be the most horrible. And that was one, kind of low-budget way, although, the scene itself was even grueling for the actress.
She claims that she wasn't even.
That.
She claims that she didn't even know about the. She knew that her legs were going to be parted, but she didn't know about the last vine going in between her legs. I have a hard time fully believing that, because obviously they'd have to set up the effect and make sure it was safe for the actress.
Well, sure, but you might not. The way they were shooting too, it may have said bad things happen, and then you get there on set and you're like, wait. You set up a what with the
Yeah.
So, but that scene also took a long time to shoot too. Like from what she said and what everybody else said, they just kept adding stuff and shooting and shooting. But in editing, you kind of had to be aware, because it's like they said, that took a year and a half to edit that film. Some time and consideration had to have been. He must have sat down and watched that quite a bit and worked on it quite a bit.
It is a shocking scene. It does keep you. I guess the argument you can make is it does make you talk about the movie, and it does make you discuss the movie. So whether or not it has any ethical merit, I guess that's for somebody, better than all of us to decide. But obviously, is something that's simply horrific and nightmare-inducing. It's effective.
Sure. And it did, they talked a lot, too, because they were first-time filmmakers. They did things like, in the commentary, they talk about they were supposed to be smoking pot in a scene, and they all did that. And then because they got so stoned, they just messed up, and they had to go back and do reshoots and everything like that. And the same with, some of the other effects or places where, for the basement, they just dug a hole, and then they cut it to parts of it were a basement that was, part of it was like Sam Raimi's garage and all of that, where you have to shoot because you only have X amount of time at the cabin, and you have, there's why didn't you dig a whole basement? They're well, we had, other places to shoot that were better than, digging a basement. So. But all of that creativity of hey, we're gonna go and dig a 6-foot hole, up in the cold, and add some stairs, and then we're also gonna do all these crazy visual effects on zero money, and to come out with all of that against them and then make the movie that they made, it's pretty remarkable. That's when you can really see somebody has the spark. This didn't turn into something like Birdemic.
Yeah, exactly. It's a total passion project. You can tell, like I said, people who were there, eventually, you have to realize that, I'm not here for the paycheck. I'm here because I want to finish this and because I believe in it. You can generally tell no one's phoning that in, And I think that it just imbues the film with a special quality that makes a lot of really great low-budget 80s horror so special. It's some of the passion that you see in films like this, hundreds of millions cannot recreate that. People can be enthusiastic about getting paid, but it's as a piece of art, it works. Even the rape scene, as a piece of art, it works morally. Whatever. You can challenge the film, but as a piece of art, it's really effective, and it has endured. It is pop culture, which is really interesting. One thing I also wanted to talk about was the Hills Have Eyes poster in the basement.
Oh yeah.
I don't know if the special features touched on that or anything, but
but go ahead.
Yeah, no, they totally talk about it. Yeah.
It was Raimi's response to the Jaws poster in another Craven film, which but I watched a special about Raimi today called from an old series. I don't know if any of you guys saw it. It was called The Incredibly Strange Film Show. And it was
I have seen that.
Yeah.
It's been a while.
Yeah, and it seems like the people say like it was about the director saying, no, my film is going to be scarier, but Raimi's wording in that documentary is really interesting because he doesn't say that my film will be scarier. He says that he's referring to Craven as being a pop horror director versus what he does, which is real, absolute, psychological, artistic horror, which I thought was really interesting. Like, and here we are today. That film is very much a part of pop culture.
Sure. Well, he talked about it in the commentary.
Though. That's really ballsy for him to call out Craven like that, because, I mean, Craven's made some pretty grisly. I mean, Evil Dead is Evil Dead, but I mean, Craven's made some pretty grisly movies, and I'm not going to say Craven's not a popular, pop culture director. I mean, you look at stuff like, Nightmare on Elm Street, obviously, and Scream being another
horror, TV horror stuff, yeah.
Well, I in the commentary he talked about how the Jaws poster was in The Hills Have Eyes, as if to say like Jaws is whatever. This is the real grittiness, and so they're like, we're young and we're gonna make this horror movie, and to them it was, well, this is the new grittiness. And he said they went back and forth as far as posters go. It's funny about that too, because I'm old enough to remember when there were still radio ads for movies, and let me tell you, the Hills Have Eyes radio ad, I need to find that. I don't know if anybody's ever archived those on in audio. Was just scared the bejesus out of my brothers and I. I was in first grade or kindergarten or whenever it was. But holy crap. The radio ads for Hills Have Eyes, we would cover our ears and la 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 and all of that, just because it was, I don't know. It's also because it's your imagination. Because of what they're describing, you have no idea what it is. But man, that was one of the scariest things ever at the time.
I think if you can find it, also try and find the Legend of Hill House radio ad. They were. It's exactly what you're saying. Remarkably scary. I know that.
The radio ad also for, not Rosemary's Baby, but there was another demon baby one.
It wasn't It's Alive, was it?
It's Alive, yes.
Oh yeah.
The radio ad for It's Alive. Oh man, as a kid, that was definitely in kindergarten at the time, and that was one of the. No idea what it was. Actually, the trailer, the TV trailer for that was pretty crazily scary too.
Horror is such a relative thing, This is all making, this is getting slightly off topic of Raimi and Evil Dead, but I find Jaws to be much scarier than The Hills Have Eyes. Jaws to me is still a pretty terrifying movie, and The Hills Have Eyes, to me that's. It's pretty good. I don't think it would be in my top 5 Wes Cravens, but it's pretty good. I don't know that I've ever been really scared shitless from the Hills Have Eyes. So it is.
Is that because it's so wildly suspenseful and sort of potentially not realistic? That's the wrong thing, but it does make you think about everything that's below you when you're bobbing on the surface of the ocean.
Yeah.
It does put those ideas in your head. Is that what makes it more scary?
I guess so. The helpless. I grew up on a lake, and there wasn't, obviously there wasn't sharks, but there was gars and there was alligators, and so the helplessness of being in the water. I certainly, I can relate to that.
Sure. So back to Evil Dead. One of the topics I want to say, is the effects and how I remembered them actually kind of being even more low budget than they were. But there's some really great gore and really inventive stuff going on. There's from just straight up gore when they're stabbing the knife, the knife with the skull and the blood bleeds out of the end of the skull knife, and the stop motion kind of thing.
I love it when the wound from the pencil, you know, when they stab the person with the pencil, then later on the wound turns black and spreads out like a spider web. That is so cool.
That is an awesome effect. It really is.
Yeah.
I'm partial to the eye gouging. I don't remember that too well from when I was young, I guess, but I remember seeing that and just being kind of like, it's repulsive but really compelling because it's so ketchup-y, you know, but it still works. It's kind of subversive in a way because it's not too realistic, but you can stand it enough to watch it and you're compelled to watch it. That's kind of what I like a lot of what happens in these films is the consequences of the violence is so Looney Tune-ish, but still really garish and like just gritty and dirty. But you can watch it. It's like I said, it's subversive in a weird way.
There's also a weird thing that they've done where a lot of movies like super gritty, you'll get a lot more gore that's kind of darker and kind of, you know, maybe they use real chicken blood or whatever. And then there's also like look, it's a horror movie and it's super red, like that kind of Hammer, you know, super red. And this kind of like straddles the line. It kind of goes back and forth. Like there's really gritty bits. And then there's also, you know, like the stop motion stuff, which maybe doesn't hold up as well, but there's like this certain charm and the idea, like, you know what? Well, this is the only way we can do this effect. Because anybody who's done stop motion, like, you have to really, it's a very long process.
It's arduous.
You have to really like to get it done. By the end, most of the time, you're like, oh, why did I choose that? Because it looks like, oh, it's going to be so easy. We just, you know, take a frame and then we take another frame. By the end of it, most people kind of regret it, you know, especially if it's not to the level of like, you know, Harryhausen.
Yeah. 2 days later, you got 3 seconds. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's just so much good stuff. And then, you know, to go to the end of it where, you know, we do I think we're going to get a, oh, wow, at least it's over kind of deal. And just, wow. It's so effective, I think. And that's another one of those endings where, you know, at the time, at least usually you had, well, at least the final girl stabbed the creature, you know. Or in any of the Atomic Age movies, you know, oh, wow, at least we killed the monsters or whatever. And this definitely doesn't have that. It ends a lot more bleaker than I think maybe people had expected, you know. I don't know what you guys thoughts are.
I think, well, particularly because at the time, this was before what later became sort of called, you know, offhandedly the European down ending. You know, there was always a sense of, hey, you know, the hero's going to win. Even the anti-hero was sort of winning, you know, during that time. And if you think about it, I mean, poor Ash was going through all this stuff. And at the end, it's, okay, we're going to win. Oh, shit, we're not going to win. Oh, no, it's all bad. And you're kind of left. Yeah. It kind of started this thing, which then got, it almost kind of, I feel like it got aped, and that's the wrong thing to say, really. But I feel like it started a trend in lesser horror movies. I'm thinking about one in particular called Pieces, which was not a great movie. But I mean, it was. But it's not, you know. But look at the end, and you go, oh, he totally didn't win, and it was something that you were left with a minor chord in your sort of on your palate at the end of all of it. It's like, oh, it's gonna work out just fine, and then badness kind of happens. But this is done in a way that didn't feel cheap. It felt like this is the only way it could have ended. When it's all said and done, you're going, wow, I don't think it could have ended any other way. It had to kind of be this way. I feel kind of bad for the guy. It felt like it was not a gimmick. And
when you get like,
it'd be interesting to watch this with ignorance of Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness and know that with what they did with Evil Dead 2 that there's this whole extra act that happens after Ash walks out of the cabin. And
that's really interesting, and that's definitely, you know, next week when we talk about that. I think that's one of the more interesting things about that. But, you know, in this, where you're like, wow, sunlight, you know, sunlight slayed the beast. All this happens, and then all of a sudden, because it's so abrupt as well, and he just realized, like, oh, wait, it's daylight. That means the things have gone away, and you're like, wow, that's all it took, for this horrible. And then, oh no. But I think what you're talking about, the ending and the kind of downer ending, I think that's also the difference between, something that's fairly fresh, even though maybe they were aping camera angles and stuff, or doing like Three Stooges stuff that they loved.
Yeah.
When you get something that becomes popular and then people overuse it, that's why I think sometimes you get, it's not like when these guys, the movies that they were trying to remake or take cues from were not necessarily all horror movies. Whereas I think a lot of horror directors sometimes, they only look at horror movies, and that's when you kind of get, I would say, like maybe something that's less passionate or not as artful, is because they're like, oh, I have this pantheon of horror movies, and that's what I'm going to draw from. Whereas that's not really how it's going here,
A great example of what you're talking about is, two movies that are very much directly inspired by this, which is, Cabin Fever, and then, obviously Cabin in the Woods. You have Cabin Fever, which in my estimation, I don't know that Eli Roth has ever seen a movie that's not a horror film, and I think he's a much, no offense to Eli Roth fans, much less talented director than Sam Raimi or Joss Whedon, and it's a lesser, more forgettable movie. Whereas you look at something like Cabin in the Woods, where there's a lot more going on, that just kind of started with that spark of like, oh, Evil Dead, but then goes off into these more insane, interesting directions.
I do have one insight about the ending, because I was watching it today thinking about the ending.
Sure.
And when I was watching it and you see Ash come out of the cabin covered in blood, the first thing, like as I'm watching this and trying to separate myself from the sequels, which is what I did, all I could think was, that motherfucker's going to prison.
There's no way you can get out of it, yeah.
Yeah, so because he stumbles out and then the entity swarms through the cabin and then it gets him, and part of me in my head was he's like, again, separation, from the sequels intact, the thing like gets him. Part of me almost has this relief. It's like, oh good, because really, what's he gonna do after you live through that? It's almost like getting swept up by that thing is, like you said, that's the only way it could really end. Well, no, it could have wound up with him going to prison for a long time, because really,
sure.
What do you do after that? Like there could have been a very different film with a drama that's
you could have a completely different sequel about the cops coming out there to investigate a murder scene and then getting trapped out there themselves.
Yeah. I just feel like when he gets caught at the end, I'm just like, God, that just saves him so much hassle, because now he doesn't have to go back covered in blood and explain, well, there was this book, No one's going to buy that.
Yeah, nobody's going to buy any of that.
Well, he tortures the evidence,
even as a kid, I was always kind of disturbed on some things where I'm like, wow, this person, never, that's it for this person. Like, almost no amount of therapy is going to help the average survivor of a horror movie. Like, that's it. Like, your mind is broken.
Isn't that why pretty much everybody in every Lovecraft story you've ever read, or every movie you've seen based on a Lovecraft story, whether it be From Beyond or whatever else, pretty much the last shot is whoever survives just goes insane. I mean, there's really just nothing else to it.
Yeah, well, even the Lovecraft game, if you played that, like, there's the insanity check, and pretty much there's not a real campaign. A campaign is much shorter if you're playing that game than other campaigns. At least with the character that you started with, anyway.
Yeah.
You're gonna roll new characters maybe, but Call of Cthulhu is a very truncated, character-driven game.
Well, Evil Dead is one of those movies that anybody that runs a Call of Cthulhu game should be forced to sit through at least once. Yeah, and I don't know how many RPG guys we have listening for this podcast, but I'm sure we've got a few, and I'm sure more than a few of you have played Call of Cthulhu, and this is an example of that game kind of done right.
Yeah, I would agree. So I guess we're getting kind of close to the end, and thanks again to people who are tuned in. Like I said, this is kind of loose. This is my first time as host. Hopefully you still dig it, and I'm really glad we could have Max on, and Adam have him back again. Yeah, it's really cool, and he's going to be here for the foreseeable future for the Evil Dead ones at least. So, until we get Jason and Julia back. But welcome, Max, and thanks. I guess let's get final thoughts. We'll go in reverse order. So Adam, Max, and then Drew, and then myself, and then we'll do endorsements as usual. So final thoughts, Adam, actually.
I think we've all said pretty much the same thing, and despite the fact that not one of us really despises this movie, and I know Jason may have some different thoughts about later films in the series. I think that we all find different things about this picture that we like, and I think it's just a film that really speaks to you depending on how you see it. Maybe the first time you've seen it. I know it certainly felt that way to me as I was looking, as I was trying to sort of find what I was looking for in a video store, working in a video store. But some people saw it in any number of other ways. But unlike other movies, I don't believe that you have to see it in a theater to really enjoy it. I think you can see it on home video, and that may actually be better on the crappiest VHS tape in the world, and somehow that makes it all the better, which is kind of how I saw it. But what surprises me about it, really, is I think, as Max said, using my sort of adult eyes, the fact that it held up so much better than I thought it would. I thought I would kind of go back and maybe I'd filled in the cracks with, a bunch of memories, stuff that didn't really happen, or even images from the second picture to kind of make it make sense. But this really stands on its own, even with its kind of flaws. Its roughness is part of its charm, and you can really see the care and the passion and the work that went into it. Not the craft really yet, just the beginnings of it, but the spark of the creativity and what everybody put into it to make this thing really what it is. It still stands alone as being a definitive picture, and I think it really endures. I was really glad to be able to see it again.
Max.
Yeah, I like most everybody else who hadn't seen it in a while. I was really happy to revisit it. The primordial nature of the production really stuck out to me this time, and as I was watching it, it kind of dawned on me that sometimes the cheapest, crappiest effects kind of look the realest and can be the most disturbing. And it's definitely another level above any of the other sequels in the series, I think. I think there's much more to discuss about this film in particular than the others because it has such a storied history to it. There's so much going on when they made it. Particularly just, with the politics of it too. There's so much going on. But I was pleasantly surprised. I was kind of, in a weird way, dreading it. Because I'd seen it in much the same situation that Adam had. I worked in video stores as a teenager, and that's how I discovered it. And it's also a really amazing snapshot of a particular scene that's really relevant within film. Just so many people who are around this film, came up into different things. I mean, Joel Coen of the Coen brothers even edited this film.
Oh yeah.
And it really, really captures that weird Michigan feel. Like there are other films that came out of this scene, and they all have like this weird, like, way that they're delivered, and it's really unique to watch. I also recommend seeing Thou Shalt Not Kill Except by Josh Becker. That's another film that Bruce Campbell was involved in, and it's cheap, rushed, and it feels very similar, but it also feels very, very real in a weird way. But yeah, love it.
Cool. Drew?
I'm looking forward to the rest of this series. I just, it was an absolute joy to revisit this movie, especially seeing that I had not viewed it in quite some time, so I felt like I could come at it with a pretty fresh perspective. And like Adam, I was really, really happy to see that it holds up, and that again that it is actually still kind of scary, because a lot of the times when you go back to horror films that you watched as a kid and they really scared you as a kid, you watch them as an adult and they don't really have that same profound effect on you. And I'm not saying I'm going to have nightmares for weeks or anything after watching this, but I got some goosebumps. This is a pretty creepy movie, and I mean that in a good way. And it's just, again, I'm looking forward to diving into the rest of this. I think that this is a fun universe that this particular movie kicks off. This is a very particular horror universe, this universe of Evil Dead, with its own internal logic and its own rules. Just as much as, last week when we were talking about the rules of the Friday the 13th films, this film series, even though it's not as vast as the Friday the 13th movies, it does have its own rules. And like I said, I'm looking forward to diving into all of that.
Awesome. For me, I actually enjoyed it more this time. I remember when I'd seen it, since I had seen the kind of slicker, Evil Dead 2, and it's the way that the gags are, the way the gore is and everything, I was kind of like, wow, why am I right? When I saw it the very first time when I was younger, I was like, why am I watching this low-rent version of this movie I've already seen? But time and distance has really made it kind of hit home more. Wow, this was, I'm really engaged in, how they did this and, how much passion is in it. And I think, again, going back to it, like you see that I wish more filmmakers would kind of look at a lot of different films rather than just aping the things that they love, which is, Raimi aped a lot of stuff that he loved. You can tell the camera angles, the kind of slapstick nature of some of the stuff, but it's not just horror movies. And I think a lot of that and, everything that's involved in it, I keep hammering on it, but just you can see, like, we're going to do this. We have something to prove. We have, we're going to make this horror movie, and it's going to be, something else. Like, and we have this budget to do it in. They talk a lot about the crew dropping off, and, slowly they have to whittle down how many people are in a scene, and, somebody's in this scene, aping, this because that actor wasn't there anymore, that kind of stuff. And all those decisions, I think, make it stronger. They bring out the creativity, and that really separates kind of the wheat from the chaff from as far as who's the talented director, actor, etc., effects person. But yeah, I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it more than I actually thought, like everybody else. But yeah, let's get endorsements in the same order, starting with Adam. If you have anything to endorse.
I do, actually. I've been drawn in pretty recently by, of all things, an iPad game that is called Device 6. That's really sort of unusual. I've heard it described as a 1960s spy thriller cross with a J.J. Abrams style mystery, minus the inevitably disappointing ending. But I'll tell you, there's something very interesting about this. It's it's one of those apps that when you start playing it, it's sort of, a bit of a stylish mystery novel sort of masquerading as a game, but it really is. It has its own sort of sound design and its own style, and it tends to sort of cast a spell on you as you're playing it. Sort of an ARG-ish alternate reality game sort of thing that pulls you in, and it slowly begins to work its way insidiously into your subconscious as it's sort of telling you a story and drawing you in. And I'm kind of fascinated by it. I was skeptical when I first started playing with it, but it's really won me over, and I'm getting deeper into it. But it's called Device 6, and I think it's definitely worth checking out because it's a very interesting way to tell stories.
Well, definitely post that because I need to check it out.
I will.
Max, any endorsements?
I I've been basically kind of immersing myself in the universe of Death Wish recently, and there's a book by a guy by the name of Paul Talbot called Bronson's Loose, and it is chapter by chapter. It goes through each of the films and discusses the turmoil of the making of, Bronson's opinions of the film, the critics' response, and of course the audience response. And it's been pretty interesting because my wife had actually never seen any of them, and she had recently read the Garfield Death Wish novel, which is way different than the movie. But we've been kind of contrasting the novels that were written, that the films were based on, versus the films, and of course just kind of looking at what audiences thought of them at the time, and kind of it's been an interesting journey. But yeah, I'd recommend Bronson's Loose by Paul Talbot. It's super cheap to get on Amazon. It's really interesting. If you're at all a fan of Charles Bronson, who was a guy who was an intellectual, I think, to an extent, and he was a guy that knew what the audience wanted. He never tried to make himself out to be something that he wasn't. So he kind of always kept himself pigeonholed. You know, he did that by choice, and I think it's a pretty interesting topic if you're a fan of his films.
It's cool that you say that about Charles Bronson. Actually, I don't know if you went to the Wilford Brimley thing that he was at but he had some great Charles Bronson stories that if I haven't told you, I need to tell you because they were pretty awesome.
He comes off like a real crotchety dude.
Actually,
yeah, it was really crazy.
Related, there was a film that Bronson did that I saw one time that was completely against the usual grain of Bronson, that was set up in The Mechanic and then, all the Death Wish movies. It was called From Noon Till 3. And it was a weird thing. Charlie Bronson in this sort of bizarrely romantic, it wasn't romantic, he was still kind of a bad guy, but there was a weird romance in the middle of it. And he's like, what's Charlie it's sort of in the West. And it was like, wow, this is a very strange thing for Charlie Bronson to be in.
So it's like the feature-length Mandem commercial then.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sort of a 1974 Western Mandem commercial.
Wow.
Awesome. That sounds great.
I have a bottle of that,
Yeah, I have seen that. Oh man, I actually did a fake Mandem cover for Butnomathon to get in one year. It's not a super great cover, but it was really fun to do. So, but yeah, Max does have a bottle of Mandem. That's really awesome. Wow. And my friend from Japan was like, he said on the playground they used to, because it was such an icon. He's like, oh, we need to get Mandem. But it was something that kids in elementary school wanted to get because Charles Bronson was just so cool. So he had fond memories of that, from grade school, of oh, Mandem must be the ultimate, cologne. So I think that's really great. So Drew, endorsements?
Well, this is the last time I'm going to be plugging my comic for a while.
No, it's not.
No, it's not. Let's not pretend. But Halloween Man issue 3 is out on Comixology today. 69 pages, $1.99. You can get it by going to the Monsterverse page on Comixology. It's been getting a good response online so far. I mean, for something that's been out less than 24 hours. But so far, the people on the Facebook seem to like it.
Awesome.
The other thing, this isn't a horror-related thing, but this does tie into one of my other deep passions, which is, of course, vintage music and vintage rock and roll. Last night, actually, I caught, I may be getting the name wrong, it's 40 Feet from Stardom or 20 Feet from Stardom, something like that. But it's a documentary, it's on Netflix, and it's all about backup singers. And it talks a lot about Darlene Love, which was in her relationship with Phil Spector, which is fascinating stuff. And Darlene Love is one of my favorite all-time female vocalists, so it was just cool to get a little bit more of that story. But I mean, it starts back in the 50s, and it goes all the way through the 90s, and this whole culture of what it means to be a background singer, and it's actually very fascinating stuff. So if you are at all a fan of music, and I know a lot of our listeners are. I would encourage you to get on Netflix. It's in the rockumentary section of Netflix streaming. Check this out. It's good stuff.
Yeah, I've heard really great things about it, so I think it's in my queue, actually.
I think you would really, knowing you, Tony, I think you probably would also, get quite a bit out of it. So if you had, just, take it's only an hour and a half long, which by nowadays is a fairly short documentary. So if you get the time, I'd suggest getting on there and giving it a go.
Awesome. For me, two things. The first, not as related, but awesome. Twilight Zone original series they came to Netflix. I think it'd been on maybe before, but there's well over 100 episodes if I'm not mistaken, up there if not more. I can't remember. I just remember. Yeah, but I'm just thumbing through and going, holy moly. But the other night I was up doing freelance work and I'll put that on. The next one, starting with, the first episode. And it's just so golden, those episodes. I mean, I can't say enough, wow, just great stuff. Even the stuff that's maybe not as great still has such a charm. Yeah, I love it. And, there are hours and hours and hours and hours of Twilight Zone up now, that's just awesome. Yeah, it's dangerous, too, because you will lose time. I had it on while I was working, so I can kind of justify it, but, man, that's awesome. And then my second one is one of my favorite Sam Raimi directed films, Crime Wave, which if you like this, you should see Crime Wave, written by the Coen brothers. I love that movie. It's so insane, and just such a love of just insanity and crazy slapstick stuff. Witty kind of patter. I don't know. I love Crime Wave, and I think if you're just discovering and haven't seen that in a while, that's my recommendation. Cool. Well, I guess that about wraps it up. Thanks again for joining us, and we miss Jason and Julia, and they'll be back after the Evil Dead retrospective. But thanks again to Max for coming on for the first time, and we'll be hearing from you in the future, and for Adam for joining us once again. We appreciate it.
Shouldn't that be joining us?
What?
Join us.
Nice. That is really good. But
thank you.
Again, share us on Facebook, tell your friends, give us feedback on the Facebook page and on Bleeding Cool and everywhere else that you can, talk about Castle of Horror. We enjoy doing this, and we hope that you do too. And everybody, good night, and we'll catch you next week for part 2.
Night, y'all.
Good night.
All right. Good night.
All right.
Awesome.